Go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Carolyn Middleton, the Director of College Counseling at Berkeley Carroll, and thank you to all of you for coming to our morning coffee. Today is bring your own version of coffee or your morning drink. And this is specifically for 9th and 10th grade parents and guardians, and we're happy to send you the recording afterwards. So if anybody isn't able to make it, or you wanted to discuss the conversation that we're going to have today with your student, you are certainly welcome to do so. I'm never sure if we're going to see one family or 50 in attendance, since I know you all lead busy lives, even despite our current pause. And I want you to know I appreciate your time, so we're going to try and make sure that we keep this this length of time here something that is enriching and helpful to you, but not go too far into your day. We host a coffee every fall and spring, if you're not aware of this, and we try and change up the format a little bit each time to ensure that the information that we're going to provide is the most helpful and the most up-to-date for you. And I hope that these sessions prove valuable to those of you that have attended more than one. We have a couple of senior families that attended all 4 in their first 2 years, and I think it was really helpful for them to just retain some of the information. This spring, as you know, has certainly been a unique one. Unprecedented is the word that I've read and heard in the nearly every single one of the many webinars I've watched and the articles I've read since we've moved to a remote schedule. And while there's still a great deal of uncertainty ahead, especially facing our juniors and seniors and their fall plans, there's also a reliable arc to the process that we'll talk about today. We'll highlight some of the most important points ahead for you and your students. And I'd like to start by introducing my colleagues. Some you may know, others you may not. You can see them right here on the screen. You'll hear shortly from Kalia Williams, who's completing her 5th year at Berkeley Carroll, though she also worked and counseled at another and taught English at another independent school for 5 years, and she worked in the admissions offices of Sarah Lawrence and the New School prior to that. You'll hear from Luis Almonte, who is the newest member of our team. He's completing his 1st year at Berkeley Carroll, and he came to us with admissions experience both at NYU and at Lehigh University. And then finally, Mary Dunn, maybe a familiar face. Mary's completing her 22nd year at Berkeley Carroll, and she manages all the operations in the college office, and we're grateful to her for keeping us on task and for setting up this webinar, among other things. She also is the person that sends all of our materials in the fall, so she's a great resource in addition to the counseling, wonderful addition to our counseling team. So it's our plan today to attempt to answer the many questions that you listed on the Google form that we had sent out initially. We've decided to approach those questions in a way that we thought might be helpful to you in digesting some of the most important points to consider, along with some note of the resources that we do provide along the way. In an homage to one of the segments of David Letterman, the late night talk show, we've organized what we think you should know about the college process into a top 10 tips for the college process. So we're hoping this is going to be helpful to you. Although in our case, we've listed them in no particular order, so we're not going to be favoring one over the other. As we go along, just in terms of housekeeping, we invite you to submit questions through the Q&A function. You'll see that you'll be able to enter information, and we'll monitor that along the way. We'll try and address those at the end of the webinar if we've missed something, and if we run out of time, we'll be sure to follow up. I also want to call your attention to the 2 documents that we provided both in the webinar invite and in the reminder that I sent. One is a 4-year calendar of college planning. It mirrors what you'd find on our website. And the second is a testing calendar. We hope that both will provide useful information to guide the plan ahead, and we'll probably make some references to them in our discussion today. The first theme that I want to talk a little bit about, our top 1, I guess, I count them down the opposite way that Dave used to do. But our first theme is really about visiting colleges. And I'll read this aloud for folks that may just be calling in. Our recommendation is to see a range of colleges during early visits. small and large, public versus private, urban versus rural, intense versus laid back, whatever categories you feel like your student might be interested in. And we'll talk about timing and so forth on that as well. Allow your student to ask, where do I feel most at home? What setting or culture or location is going to challenge me? And where will I grow? So it's not just about where you feel most comfortable. With campuses closed right now and the in-person tours canceled largely, many colleges have actually upped their game in terms of their virtual visit opportunities, and any family can join those. Of course, eCampus Tours, which is one of the websites, and uvisit.com/college search. These are two sites that provide two of the kind of basic tours. It's not too early to think about college, and it's not too early for 9th and 10th graders, but for some, it can be really hard to envision what the college experience can be like just from a virtual tour. And sometimes they're actually not ready for an in-person tour either, just not mentally ready to be there, especially if they've just started high school. For many 9th and 10th graders, and for many of us, college ends up being what, the vision of college ends up being what they see on TV or in the movies, or it's based upon the experience of parents or siblings or friends, and they don't know what's going to make the most sense for them. And sometimes it takes visiting a variety of places to help figure that out. And sometimes it also takes the maturity that a student develops along the way to allow them to know themselves. Or sometimes they know a college based upon the fact that it's the most selective, so they think it's the quote unquote best or the best choice. It has the best basketball team. There are many reasons that are unexamined at this early stage. But still, at the beginning of any search, you can begin with a wide range of schools, and that's why we recommend seeing this range. Before most students even step out onto a campus, you might hear them say, I've been at BC forever, so I know I want to look at big universities, or I love BC, so I think I want to look only at small liberal arts colleges. And I think it's a mistake, as it limits the possibilities of what could be far too soon. So often we'll talk with families and with students in particular about widening that funnel. One of the things I think our current remote learning setup may allow for students to do is think carefully about how they are learning now, what they appreciate in their relationships with teachers, what the expectations are of more independent learning, which does mirror the college learning process a little bit more, and how they might be developing their areas of interests or their skills, and how that might help to guide some of what they know about themselves. And then when campuses do open up, we, like I said, suggest combining a campus visit, a range of places, but maybe doing a campus visit with the official tour and the information session with a family trip or some kind of intentional destination. We want to go up to Boston and see 4 schools, but then also see some of the locale and experience some of the setting around it. That takes out the intensity of it. See if you can find campuses that might represent those different sizes and settings and et cetera. And we have if you're planning on one of these trips in the future, 6 months, 12 months down the road, we do have a handout that we can provide to you that'll give you a sense of size and locations. And then if you don't plan to travel, if you are restricted in terms of your travel, even when the campuses open up, there's so many places in and around New York City where you can experience the large, the small, the urban, the suburban, the rural, the liberal arts college or the university, the co-ed versus the women's college. So that's beginning with the campus tours. I'm going to move in a little bit more on this theme of campus tours. What we find when students get to the end of the process is sometimes they've got their heart set on some of the most selective places out there. So I'll read this piece of advice. We advise to visit the reaches last, maybe not first, or maybe mix them in together. Going to the most famous and the ultra-selective colleges at the outset can sometimes warp expectations and make the other choices, which are the likelier ones, seem like lesser choices. And it's best to feel good about a range of places. 4.3%, 5.5%, 6.3%, 7.2%, 17%. I don't want to name names, but these are the admit rates for some of those most selective colleges and universities in the country. If we look at all 2,400 colleges across the US, the actual admit rate for all of those schools collectively is about 2/3. So 65, 66% is every year the overall admit rate. So these are sort of the the exceptional ones, the outset, the ones that really don't match what the most colleges look like in terms of their acceptance rates. And the odds of being admitted to one of these really, ultra selective colleges isn't really in anyone's favor. Still, it can be very easy to plan a college trip that starts in the bucolic little town in New Jersey, or a city in Connecticut that's known for its great pizza, places that house some of those most selective colleges. The hazard in doing so is managing expectations. And it becomes much more difficult. And as my colleague and friend Kalia says, seeing only the shiniest stars in the sky makes it hard for the other stars to match the same sparkle. Our advice is to really mix things up. We want students to fall in love with the school that matches them at every level of selectivity. You'll hear us say over and over again that the foundation school that you love, meaning the school that we can predict that you'll reliably get into, should be the same in terms of the love that you have for that school that's in the middle, that we predict is probably going to be a yes, but it's more of a 50-50. And then the reaches as well, that whole list, when you choose that variety of schools, we hope that you'll be happy, so that the end of the process never feels like you're going to be settling for something. So ultimately, students should feel really comfortable about their options, and managing expectations a little bit earlier rather than later will make for a better overall experience. And I'll put one more caveat in here. Know that we do help families and students shape their college list. We provide a list of about 30 schools in that second semester junior year, so that there are a range that students are looking at when they're really beginning to narrow their list down and expand their list as they do some of their more specific research. So students do know going into the process what's based upon the credentials that they actually have at that point, test scores, GPAs, all of those things. They have some sense of what is to come and what would be more selective versus less selective. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kalia Williams, and she's going to address the third.
Good morning, everybody. So this next slide says, as much as possible, allow your student to control the process. Think of them as the drivers and yourself as the passenger of a car. You can offer advice and suggestions, a few more at the start, but the wheel is in their hands. Stay in your lane. So I think this prospect can be really difficult for some families and an easier one for others. The last time you went through a process similar to this one, your student was either headed into pre-K or middle school or the 9th grade. And it was completely, it made complete sense that you would be the one to make the appointments, check into the admissions office when you arrived for a tour. If your application was missing materials, you were probably the one to follow up with that information. So your role as the driver in the application process was the ideal one. And it makes sense that and it also makes more sense because both the parents and the students are going to be joining us as a community. And if you remember, college isn't quite like that. So we think when possible, let your students make the decisions about where you visit. When you arrive to your campus tour, you want to let them check in with the admissions office. If they have questions about the status of their application, it's okay to allow them to make the call. You would be surprised at how good they are at keeping track of their application portals, which are a thing now. They can see in real time when their materials are arriving at different schools. And they're paying we noticed that they paid really close attention and are really good at keeping themselves on track. And I also know from past experiences that colleges are far more interested in hearing directly from a student. Beyond the visit and search process, it's also, I think, difficult to imagine your son or daughter being up to the task of arranging those things, filling out applications, talking with college admissions officers and faculty, making decisions about which college is the right fit. And while we want you to always feel like you're an important part of the process, you are players in this game, so to speak. You'll give really good advice about things that students just can't control. And so we know when it comes down to talking about cost, you're the people that they should talk to the most about that. But it's important for students to arrive at those decisions that they're making with help, support, and a lot of sounding board advice from you. Parents are often the best sounding boards because you know them the most, but we find that sometimes if that advice is given too forcefully or too often, it can be rejected, even if it's the best advice that they probably need to hear at the time. So remember, when you drop your child off at a college or university that they've decided on, you're going to get back in the car and leave them to navigate a new environment. And so we want you to be comfortable with giving them control over the process early on. And that's probably the best, giving them that control over the process early on is probably the best thing you could do to prepare them for that task. Number 4. So there's no formula to highly selective college admissions. Having the right grades, scores, and activities will not always, quote unquote, get you in. It doesn't always work that way. Be open to new options and broaden the search. So this slide inevitably makes me think of the conversations we have with our seniors in April after decisions come out. Because of course, there's always going to be someone who doesn't get into the highly selective college of their choice. And their first reaction is often to say, but I did everything right. I worked hard for good grades. I studied for the SAT or the ACT for months. I got, a quote unquote good score. I participated in the kinds of activities that would make me stand out. So why didn't I get in? And that's often the point where it reminds me that students and families sometimes approach highly selective college admissions as though there is a recipe or a formula to getting in. And there just simply isn't. If there was, everyone would probably strive to look the same. And I can't think of anything more boring than having 35,000 applications, if that's what your school receives, and everyone's sort of done the same thing. Because I think at the heart of it, what colleges are looking to do is to craft a class of diverse students and dynamic thinkers. And so it makes sense that they would want to see students coming from all different academic backgrounds in terms of what kinds of schools they go to, all different kinds of activities. And sometimes that also means a wide variety of academic profiles. So, we always want to stress that it's important that students do their best in a set of courses that will challenge them, but allow them to thrive. But there are going to be times when students make mistakes. They're only human. And so you'll hear us tell students that they should do their best and finish strong, especially in their junior year or the start of their senior year. Though we also want to remind everybody that colleges are going to be looking at a student's academic profile from 9th grade on. So everything counts. But even when students don't have the perfect grades, there are going to be really good options for them when it comes down to colleges. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but when it comes to choosing extracurricular activities, we want students to make choices that allow them to make discoveries about who they are and what they're interested in. It's also important to consider that college admissions has changed since I went to school or since you went to school. And so many of the most selective colleges, 50+ colleges, have become more selective, and many colleges have undergone changes. I think the school that I like to highlight most when I think about that is Northeastern University. And I remember when I started working in college counseling 10 years ago, they had an admit rate of about 38%. By 2017, that admit rate had dropped to 24%. And last year it was 18%. And part of that is because the school began to highlight some of their programs that were far more popular, like their co-op program. And they morphed into being a pretty regional university, into an internationally recognized institution with students from all over the world. And so that inevitably had an effect on what their application pool looked like and how many students they could reasonably take every year. And so I say all that to say that there's no formula or recipe to ensure admission to any particular school, but it's also, as Carolyn mentioned, there are over 2,500 colleges and universities in the US and plenty of schools abroad, and every student will find a number of schools that will fit them both academically and socially. Help your student to find activities for the long term rather than check a box on the application or to look good for colleges. Colleges care far more about students' devotion to an activity and how it has inspired them. I just wrote, and I'll put in a plug for our college office blog, which we'll share the link to after this presentation. But I just wrote a blog post about summer activities and how we're having to reimagine what the summer looks like in the aftermath of COVID-19 or even during COVID-19. And so I've had to think a little bit more deeply about how and why students choose their extracurricular activities. And one thing that has become more clear is that these are choices that students should make thoughtfully, not just to check off that box or to do something that they think a college will, be interested in. When college admissions reps sit down to read a student's application, they're ultimately just trying to get to know who those students are. And so when they look at those extracurricular activities, they're not counting to see whether or not you've filled in all 10 slots provided by the Common App. And there's not a checklist of things that you should have done, but they're looking to see how what a student does with their free time complements the other aspects of their application. They're looking for authenticity. Knowing that your student has developed a real interest in a subject or activity makes them an interesting application to read. And we encourage students to be thoughtful about the ways that they spend their free time. And we're always reminding them to spend time on things that make them happy. It doesn't really do them any good to go off to a pre-college program to study something that they're not interested in. We want them to be excited about the things they're doing. When I worked in admissions, I was really excited about the students who had jobs or took on internships that informed the path that they wanted to take in college. So I never questioned the number of activities listed, whether it was 3 or 10, but I did look to see that students were committing themselves to activities that were meaningful and purposeful and not just like a long list of clubs that say little about them other than they know how to join a club. It's easy to sort of sign that form and that during the club fair, but whether or not you actually commit to it and show up and take on leadership roles, that's really important. And so you'll hear us say this a lot, but depth, not breadth, is always the key here. Thank you.
Muted. Good morning, everyone. My name is Luis Almonte, and I will be talking to you about a couple things. So first and foremost, everyone's favorite subject, which is standardized testing. So I'm going to read the slide just for anybody that's not on visual and audio. So standardized testing is a necessary evil, but don't overdo it. A program of long-term skills development and strategy can help improve scores, but don't prioritize testing over grades or think of small improvements as overly meaningful. I think that's a really great slide to think about, because I think a lot of times throughout this process, people think that the most important factor of the admissions application is standardized testing. And while that does play a role, you're going to hear a lot when you're researching colleges and universities that they're doing a contextual review or a holistic review, meaning that they're looking at every single part of the admissions application before they make a decision on the student's file. And one thing that we always like to say and we enforce with our students is this belief that a standardized testing score does not measure a student's capability or their worth. And that's really, a philosophy that, should be adopted throughout this process is, there are going to be processes and test prep that needs to be taken, but realistically, there are other parts of the application that are just as important. And in my personal opinion, when I worked in admissions, the base and foundation of where I would start any admissions file was opening up the student's transcript, because that's where the student's academic capability day to day is going to mirror what's going to be happening at the college level. So with thinking about standardized testing, we did provide some handouts and some scheduling, and with what's going on with COVID-19 right now, we do want to address that there are some necessary changes that have been happening to the testing landscape. There are conversations about testing going online and becoming official scores. What that might look like for your student when they're applying for their for college and university might be a little different, and it might mirror back kind of the quote unquote normal process. So with thinking about that, the typical tests that colleges and universities are looking for, if it is a requirement, is the SAT and the ACT. And a big thing that we do at Berkeley Carroll is we want our students to understand which test is more inclined for their academic ability, as well as in terms of timing and strategy. So the SAT, for those that don't know, will measure critical reading and math. There's a writing section as well too. And then the ACT is a little different because it measures reading, English, math, and science, as well as a writing section. So there is some form of strategy that goes into understanding which test that your students should take. And what we do with that is here at Berkeley Carroll, we do have a partnership with an organization called Compass Prep. And what we do is we do a practice SAT and a practice ACT. So it's a full length test. And then afterwards they receive their raw scores and have a conversation with the college counseling office as well as Compass Prep to determine which score was the best that they completed and which one might be the best exam to move forward with. In terms of timing, this all happens in sophomore year, and testing really shouldn't be a factor through, with test prep and kind of hammering in these testing skills and strategies. I personally feel that students should start the first semester of junior year or the second semester of junior year. And looking at the admissions timelines of colleges and their decisions, if a student decides to go early decision or early action, they have up until October to complete standardized testing. And if they are going to complete a regular decision application, they have until December to complete their testing. So there's plenty of time, and that's something that we really want to emphasize, is that we don't want to stress students out with standardized testing when it's not a necessary point to kind of hammer in during specific times of their education experience, and really taking into consideration when they're thinking of applying and what time is best for them. We do recommend that students complete test prep. So we have a bunch of partnerships with different organizations, and really understanding if your student is more inclined to do better with tutoring one-on-one, if it's a classroom type of setting that they excel in. Lots of students can do it on their own with different SAT and ACT manuals, but SAT and ACT are going to be the primary testing and exams that colleges and universities will take into consideration. But there are some schools that will take into consideration SAT2, well, they used to be called SAC2s, but they're called subject tests. I would say that they're less inclined to take, that there are not as many schools that are requiring SAT2 subject tests. And what they're really looking for are probably more the selective institutions are recommending or requiring SAT subject tests. So with that, and you'll find that that's an ever-changing landscape, that more and more colleges are not requiring subject tests, but instead some of them are recommending them. And Compass Prep does a really good job, if you check out their website, of detailing what colleges require certain testing and what you can send in lieu of testing. And another thing that we really like to hammer is that there's over, right at this point in time, there's over 1,200 schools that have gone test optional. And, before COVID-19, there were really, there's a wide number of schools that are test optional. And that really does become part of the conversation, because not every student is going to be the strongest test taker, while they might be a really strong student in the classroom. So those really are the discussions that we have on a one-on-one basis, is really determining, putting their best foot forward with test prep and putting their best foot forward with trying to receive the best score that they can. And we advise that students take the SAT or the ACT about 2 to 3 times. Because statistically, with looking at data and national data, most students will go up the second time that they take an exam or the third time that they take an exam. After that, there's not usually much that fluctuates throughout the process. So, when we're hammering test prep from 10th grade to 11th grade and we're going over and over, and, when families are trying to have students take a test 4 or 5 times, a lot of times it is a bit of wasted energy with knowing that there's not much that's going to fluctuate. With the student taking the exam 1 to 2 times, they are able to, 2 to 3 times, they are able to receive a super score. So they will take the highest scores from different sections of different tests on different dates and combine them together. And colleges will look at that as the highest performance of the test, even though they were at different times. So there is a lot of strategy that goes behind standardized testing and test prep and what we recommend for students. Overall, when thinking about, test optional schools, there's a really helpful website called the fairtest.org. So you'll see that there's a lot of really recognizable schools like Colby College, Colorado College, and Wesleyan University that all are test optional. So if a student doesn't, want to send their testing and all they want to do is send their transcripts and all the other requirements, that's all that they have to do. And there are students who go test optional and don't send testing, or there are students that are confident in their testing and send it, and both can still be admitted. So that very much is part of the conversation. In terms of students that are looking outside of the United States, we do want to make an important comment about that, is There are certain schools that in the UK that will require a subject test in lieu of A levels, IB, or AP. But again, that all becomes a conversation and an individual process for each student, and depending what their list is looking like, will determine the conversations that we're having in terms of testing that they need to submit. Other schools, for instance, like Brandeis University, they will go test optional, but you would have to submit something in lieu of that testing. So for instance, at Brandeis, you can submit a graded paper instead of your standardized testing. So in this day and age, I'd like to say that the standardized testing landscape is very, very different. I think that colleges and universities really understand that, you know, testing is only one factor of, measuring somebody's academic ability. But I really want to reinforce that the classroom, you know, and the story, the narrative, everybody's students on a different playing field. Every student has different resources in terms of equity and access. And that's something that it really does become a part of the conversation, even though some schools might require a score. And thinking about colleges and universities as well too, a lot of students get fixated on a particular number, but you'll find that when you're researching colleges and universities, there's usually a median range. And what we mean by that is that, you know, there might be this score to this score was the hotspot of students being admitted to this college or university. And a lot of times students will see that number and think, okay, I'm not going to get in. But realistically, that's the middle 50%. 25% of the students scored under those median scores for SAT and ACT, and 25% scored higher. So it really is a larger variety of scores that schools are admitting. And a lot of times that data can be viewed on specific colleges and universities' websites. The next slide that we have is try not to succumb to brand name thinking. A college education is far more valuable than a jacket or a phone. Ask tough questions about the quality of the product, its features, and its durability, and move past the allure of the brand. So that one is, you know, pretty much, we really want this process, and we spoke a little bit about this in the beginning of the presentation, to be about fit. And that's a really big word that you're going to hear throughout your students' college application process. And the motto that we have in our college counseling office at Berkeley Carroll is college is a match to be made, not a prize to be won. You know, we do take into consideration selectivity, academics, but also your student's personality, what your student is looking for in terms of academic majors, what your student is looking for in terms of social life, because that'll be their home for the next 4 to 5 years of their life. There's so many aspects that go into the college search process, and we really want to move away from students becoming fixated with a brand name. You know, one thing that comes to my mind is US News and World Report. A lot of times you'll see, you know, the Ivies on this list. You'll see these really high name schools on this list, but realistically, when thinking about how those lists are conducted, you know, a lot of times it is just going to be SAT and ACT score and the average of the students that have applied to there. A lot of times it is going to be endowment. It is going to be athletics. But really, you should be thinking about, you know, classroom size. You should be thinking about student happiness on campus, social life, graduate employability. There's so many other aspects outside of what just these lists are measuring. And there's some really great schools that won't be as high on that list, or they're not the brand names that we think of, but are just as perfect of a fit than any other school or institution that students will go to. You know, we've had students go to really high brand name schools. And throughout my career, I know a lot of students that have gone to different schools and didn't think it turned out not to be what they were expecting. While other students ended up making a decision to go somewhere which is probably not as well known, still well known, but maybe not the most brand name school that you could think of, and are absolutely happy. So we really want to encourage that, you know, to keep an open mind throughout this process. In the question and answer tab in this chat, I know that we spoke a little bit about the list that we conduct. And basically that's what we do, is provide a wide variety of schools in the reach category, in the middle category, and the foundation. And what we do is we conduct a student survey, a parent survey, and then we have individual conversations with your student to determine just, you know, who they are and what they're about, as well as looking at their academics, but also getting to know them as a person. And that really provides us with a wide variety of tools and resources that we can use to conduct a search, to really kind of craft a list and shape a list that values both your students' academic ability and experience, but also who they are and what they're looking for is a really important aspect of that as well too. And that's really what we talk about fit. I think of fit a lot of times in 3 different ways. I think of it in academic fit, personal fit, as well as geographic fit. Where does your student really want to be a part of this process? And where do they see themselves taking advantage of these experiences throughout the country or the world? An external measure of success is the ability of high achieving students to gain admissions to most selected colleges and universities, but also an additional measure is defined by our students' satisfaction with the process. You know, and if we do this right, it really does become, the college search process does become, you know, successful in terms of the self-assessment and the development of the list being well-balanced and well-researched, and the end goal being that your student is enrolling somewhere where they're happy, where they're academically challenged, and where they are going to thrive. And like I said, there's lots of things to consider. You're going to find that later on in the process, starting second semester of junior year, that's really where the individual conversations are going to be happening. First semester of junior year and, you know, 9th and 10th grade, we do programming that's a little bit more subtle, and that we talk about, you know, thinking about what their values are and thinking about what's important to them. And we really are trying to plant the seeds and kind of nourish those conversations. So by the time that we have those individual conversations in junior year, we really are, you know, honing in on the specifics of, you know, now it's just you and your process and what you're thinking of and what you're talking about with your family. You know, what is important to you? What is a deal breaker? What are some things that are negotiable? You know, socially, what are you looking for? Academically, what are you, how are you looking to be challenged? What are you looking to do for fun outside of the classroom that's still an academic endeavor? You know, electives, so many things that we're taking into consideration. And a lot of times you'll find that there's more conversations that are happening than just what the school's name is. Our next slide is, don't be too quick to focus on only what you want to study in high school. Most colleges will expect solid preparation in all subjects. Science majors need to write well, and humanities majors need quantitative skills. High school is for preparation, college is for exploration. And this one's really great because there's usually a temptation for students and families to assume that students need to have a defined major and career by the time that they're applying. And that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes students are still kind of figuring it out, but one thing that we really want to emphasize is that you have to be well-rounded. You know, if you're thinking about being an engineer, and a lot of times we have conversations with students and they're like, but I don't get why I have to take humanities. You know, if you're an engineer, you're going to be collaborating a lot. And a lot of times you might be collaborating with the marketing department, with, you know, graphic designers, you might be collaborating with architects. You have to be a good writer, a good speaker. And that's really where, you know, we talk about this liberal arts foundation, and most schools having a general education or core curriculum requirement is that, you know, they're presenting our students with the foundational skills that they need to be a good speaker, a good writer, and a good critical thinker. And those are all necessary in any field that a student goes into. So we always emphasize that students should maintain, you know, their academic ability and success in their 5 core subjects. So math, English, science, foreign language, and history or humanities. Those are typically what colleges are looking to evaluate on transcripts. And, you know, there are times where that schedule might look a little differently based on a student that might know exactly what it is that they want to do. But realistically, there's no way, unless you're going to like a trade school or vocational school, that you're going through a college process not being able to take a writing class as any type of major, or not being able to take a quantitative class as any type of major. It's a necessary skill. So that's something that we really try to enforce throughout our conversations at Berkeley Carroll, and really kind of teaching the emphasis of why it's, and the importance of why it's necessary for students to be able to be well-rounded and successful in all subjects. And when it comes to deciding what their major is, you know, that definitely is something that becomes part of the process, but there's a lot of students by the time that they're applying that are undecided, and that's okay too. And that's something that we really want to enforce, because thinking about, you know, a huge question of like, what is it that you want to do for the rest of your life, a lot of times can induce anxiety. But one thing that we really try to guide that conversation is, you know, with parents as well as in the school, is talking to students about, what do you enjoy to do? What do you do and that you enjoy? What classes are you excelling at? What's your favorite class and why? Those are the types of conversations that really gears a student's narrative and help them self-reflect and really understand, what is it that I'm good at? What is it that I enjoy? And what can I see myself doing for fun, but also what can I see myself doing as a career? And those are really big conversations that we have. We have an extensive survey that we give for students as well as parents that ask them those questions. And a big part of this process and the counseling part of this process is really asking those open-ended questions that really make a student dig deep and kind of ask themselves, you know, who am I? What am I about? What am I passionate about? You know, what do I want to give back to the world? You know, what do I enjoy reading? What do I enjoy watching? Those are those big questions that really kind of shape a student's personality that a lot of times will align with what they're looking at as a career. And it might not be as evident for some students early on, but eventually they will get there. And I think for students who leave Berkeley Carroll and enter a school undecided, there's a 2-year exploration period where they can really figure that out. That's really going to allow them the opportunity to develop as an individual, take some things for fun, try some different classes, and really find what their groove is in college. So our next slide is pretty much thinking about finances with college. So start thinking about the cost of attendance early on, and don't be afraid to have the real conversations about finances with your student. Investigate savings plans, financial aid, payment plans, merit scholarships, and outside scholarships. And I think this slide now more than ever is extremely important, especially with what's going on with the economy. You know, everybody's financial situation is different, or it can change. And that's something that I always like to highlight because, you know, college is expensive. Berkeley Carroll is expensive. And when you're thinking about financing a 4-year institution, not just for one student, sometimes it's for 2 that overlap because everybody's family situation is different as well too. We really encourage you to have those open conversations with your students early on. You know, when thinking about the cost of attendance for school, it's really going to determine on everybody's financial situation and if they're applying for financial aid. So we do a really good job here at Berkeley Carroll of hosting financial aid workshops. So we do one every fall, and then we do a collaborative effort with other Brooklyn independent schools in the spring to really kind of teach everybody about the financial aid process and put forward financial literacy so that way it's easier to navigate this process. Students as well as parents are going to have to become very comfortable with words such as, you know, merit scholarship, work study, subsidized loan, unsubsidized loan. You know, there's so many different words that come into this play that we don't necessarily use day to day. You know, for different families who maybe have a higher need in terms of financial assistance, that is really a really big part of the process is understanding this terminology and understanding the landscape of this process. So with thinking about cost of attendance, it's going to look different for every family, determining what colleges and universities are giving families. So whatever they're giving you in the form of need-based scholarships or loans or whatever that is, a lot of times when you subtract that from the tuition and the cost of the tuition and the fees that are associated with the school, that's going to be the cost of attendance. And you're going to hear a lot of times this word that's called estimated family contribution, and that's basically what your family can pay and what they're expecting you to pay. So that's a really big word to take into consideration throughout this process. When looking at the landscape of financial aid and funding a university, all colleges cost different. You know, state schools are going to be very different than private schools. Private schools are going to be very different than public schools in terms of how much tuition is going to be and how much financial assistance that you might get. Scholarships are usually a big part of this conversation. And what I want to say is there's merit scholarships. And for most schools, I would say it's going to vary. There's some schools where there's no additional application process. So as long as you apply to the school and your admissions application is complete, they're going to review you for a merit scholarship. And if you're reviewed and you are, you know, academically qualified, you're a community leader, you have a really great story, those are aspects of your application that can deem you meritorious. There's also some schools that will require you to apply for a merit scholarship for their particular institution. And one thing that I always say is, you know, a merit scholarship is not always guaranteed. There are students who could be at the top of their class at Berkeley Carroll applying for a merit scholarship, and, you know, in a perfect world, they would receive one. But there's a different applicant pool that's taken into consideration and different aspects that are taken into consideration. So another thing that we like to, you know, touch base on is that when taking into consideration financing and education, it's not a wise decision to think or to assume that a merit scholarship is going to be a part of that cost of attendance for that school. If it is, it's a great, you know, great scenario to be in. But like I said, it's not always guaranteed. But there are scholarships that have come through for certain students and really have made it a financial realistic for a student to attend that institution. There is also outside scholarships. One really great website that we recommend is fastweb.org as well as bigfuture.org. Those are really good search engines for students to take a hold of a scholarship process. And what I would say is most scholarships are going to be an additional application process if they're from an outside or external source from the institution. A lot of the times there's an application process as well as an essay that's required. So we always tell our students to kind of start early with the search process in junior year, sometimes in sophomore year, to know what you need to do for junior and senior year. But you'll find that most scholarships are going to be due in senior year. And with reviewing that, you really have to be mindful because in senior year, your student's going to be balancing, their academic classes, their social life, as well as this college application process. And when you throw, an additional application on process with scholarships, it does become something that can be overwhelming. But if you plan effectively and you're staying on top of the different scholarships and monitoring what they're looking for each year, it does become a lot more organized and more manageable to be able to do. For families that are applying for need-based aid, that's going to be a very different process. And if you're applying for need-based aid, there are typically two applications that need to be completed. One is the FAFSA. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid that qualifies a family for financial assistance, loans, grants, and work study coming from the government. And then a CSS profile, which is typically the college scholarship survey that's for a particular institution. These are the really big ones that you'll have to worry about, later in the future. But we just like to kind of mention them and get those words and get that terminology on your radar, because those are the big aspects of the financial aid process for need-based aid that's going to determine how much a college is going to give you and how much your cost of attendance and estimated family contribution is going to be. They're really great tools that you can start using now up until when you're getting ready to apply to college. So a lot of colleges and universities have this tool called the net price calculator. And what a net price calculator is you can go on a website. There's general ones as well as certain institutions have their own specific one on their website. And you can input a lot of information and salary information, income information, and it'll generate this magic number that'll say this is ballpark what you can expect if you would attend this institution that we would give you in financial aid. We always say that that's just a ballpark figure. There is room for human error. Sometimes people put too many zeros. Sometimes you own a business or a farm. Sometimes there's a sibling that's enrolled at another college. So there's a lot of aspects that go into the financial aid process. And you're gonna learn very quickly that every college or university that you talk to, the answer is gonna be, it depends. And that really is something that I will say can be pretty common to hear, but I think that the value of that is that every student does have an individual situation and circumstances as it relates to their finances. So, and it depends shows that they really are taking all things into consideration when it comes to your financial aid process. For students who are higher need or need higher assistance, or, some families that, are really looking to have a little bit more financial assistance, there are a list of schools that meet 100% of full need. And what that means is, whatever your estimated family contribution is, if that contribution is, 0, you can't give anything. There are some schools that will meet you with 100% of the package or close to 100% of the package. Maybe your estimated family contribution is 50%. There are certain schools that have made that dedication to meet families where they are. And those are something that we are mindful about throughout the process with working with students. If we understand that there is a circumstance where there is a higher need in the situation, we are mindful about some of the conversations that we're having in regards to particular institutions that we are thinking about in terms of 100% of full need.
Great. And for our final slide, I wanted to go back and talk a little bit about this idea of authenticity that I think Ms. Williams had mentioned a little bit earlier on in our talk. I'll read the slide for those that might be calling in. The most interesting applications are those that are authentic, developing interest to learn something, pursue meaning, or to connect to bigger issues is always going to ring truer in the college process than doing something for how it looks to colleges. I mentioned that I've been doing many webinars, and it's reassuring for me to hear a lot of the colleges talk about this as part of their like a main piece of their process and what they're reading. We tend to think in terms of numbers and data in some ways, and certainly there's a lot of kind of quantifying stuff as we're guiding students through the process. We discuss strategy, we discuss ideas, but this idea of authenticity is something that's really important to also remember. So whether it's a list of activities on a college application, the true voice that a student is presenting in their essay, or the traits that come through in the letters of recommendation that teachers and the college counselor will write on the student's behalf, authenticity is the word that college admission officers seem to always come back to. In a holistic application review process, this is another term that you'll hear quite a bit through the college process, holistic. Authenticity definitely is something that, that is an important factor because it helps colleges create a community of students. They learn about those individuals. That community of students are going to be living and learning together as part of a residential campus. So this is a piece that that you don't often hear so much about when discussing college admissions. It's important to remember that the transcript of a student's courses and grades is going to be the cornerstone of any application process. And generally colleges are looking at students' performance from the 9th grade through the first quarter or semester of the senior year. There's some that count from 10th grade on, but for the most part, they're looking for that growth and that upward trend and that transition as students take on courses that are more rigorous and more challenging, that they continue to do well. So it's one reason why we typically will say for especially 9th graders, the biggest job that they can do is learn how to be the best 9th grader that they can be. To learn how to be a great student so that sophomore year they face that challenge, so that junior year they face that challenge as it becomes increasingly more challenging overall. And it's also important to remember that we're talking about performance in context. Every high school is different. So how your student is taking advantage of what's offered in our school and how much they've challenged themselves within our school, within the opportunities that are available. If we think about a pool of 35,000 applications or 6,000 applications, you're gonna see students in an applicant pool that are coming from a variety of different high schools, a variety of different domestic and global contexts. So colleges will review your students' performance within what BC has to offer. Most colleges will get transcripts from high schools around the country, like I said, around the world. They work hard to understand those differences. So you'll find that admission officers actually often will read regionally. So they work hard to understand differences between schools, including curriculum and grading policies and opportunities for advanced coursework, independent research, inter and cross-cultural understanding, interdisciplinary analysis, hands-on learning, and all of this is available across the Berkeley Carroll curriculum. And it is something that comes through in an application, not just by the names of a course on a transcript, by what students are writing, how they're writing, how teachers are writing about those students, and how the college counselors are writing about students as well. So I think the idea of authenticity is really important to also recognize when referring back to what my colleague said earlier about activities outside the classroom. You know, summer is going to be re-envisioned this year for sure. But as we're thinking about summer activities and extracurriculars and co-curriculars, I think the best presentation of activities really starts with these authentic interests and meaning. And as your students get older, more opportunities become available for seeking, you know, that depth, those deeper, more meaningful connections, and even leadership opportunities become available more toward the end of high school. So final note here before I run into, I think we're pretty close to 10 o'clock, but we will stay on and answer a few questions. The final note I wanted to make about the current global pandemic is that we're connecting with admission directors all over the country via webinars and personal conversations and articles that are filling our inboxes. And rest assured that colleges understand the significance of what your students are experiencing. They too have been mostly Zooming their way through the spring, and the uncertainties of what we're all experiencing is what they're experiencing as well. It's not going to be lost on them that New York City is really the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak in the US. They understand that this summer is going to be different than any other summer that a student might present, or what they might be doing in a semester. If there are dips, if there are increases, you know, there's only a part of what your student is presenting in an overall application process is what's been going on this spring and certainly through the summer. They will understand the context of this all. So now we're going to take a few minutes to answer questions. If you need to leave, we definitely understand. We know that you've got lives outside of what we're doing here. We're happy to take some of those questions that you had submitted to us in the Q&A. I haven't been able to look at them because I've been sharing my screen.
We had one question that was asking about how the process differs in terms of a student that's applying for an art program. So for instance, maybe they're applying to NYU Tisch or to RISD or SCAD. So if we can talk a little bit about that, I think that would be helpful for the audience.
Yeah, I think that process is a bit different. I'm sorry, did you want to answer that, Louis? Or you want me to jump in?
Any of us could. I'm either side.
I would say that what's really different when students are applying to sort of the performing and visual arts colleges overall, if they're applying to a conservatory or an art school, much of the process is based upon an audition, a portfolio, sometimes an interview related to those things. We've had students who have applied for performance, for design programs, our art department, our theater department, all of the music department, all of those capable folks on our campus are incredibly helpful in helping students to figure out how to present themselves in those processes. And then you sort of have students who are often looking at both those specialized colleges or schools, and they're looking at more of the liberal arts and sciences model. And going back to what Mr. Almonte had said earlier about that balanced curriculum, and still making sure that they're balancing the coursework that they're taking, not specializing too early on. It's still a really valuable piece of what they're going to need going into the admissions process, but then also thinking about what they do in their world. Our performers, our musicians, our artists are still writing. They're still thinking about things from a variety of perspectives. So even an art program, for example, is going to build in some quantitative coursework because it helps to diversify how a student thinks about things, and it helps them to be more creative about how they're approaching a certain project or topic.
So we have two questions that popped up. One is, if a student is on the fence, is it recommended to take an advanced class and likely get a lower grade, or get a higher grade in an on-level class?
Ms. Williams, do you want to take this one?
You know, I mean, I think one of the things we always recommend is that students take a class that's really going to help them thrive. And sometimes it makes the most sense for them to take the more advanced level class if that's where they are in the sequence of the courses, but also sometimes that's about their interest. You know, I think colleges are always going to be, one of the things we do, we provide every school with a copy of our school profile. So they get to see what our students have available to them in terms of their academic choices. And so, you know, we often we'll have students who think, should I take the more advanced level of calculus, or should I take on-level calculus? And I think one of the things we encourage them to do is to really talk to their teachers when they're as part of that decision-making process, to help understand what that material is going to look like, to get a strong sense of how they might perform in that class. I think sometimes students look at a more advanced class and say, there's no way I'm going to do well in this. And that's sometimes, you know, a little bit typical. They don't always have the confidence to know that they're going to do okay in something. And it also comes down to, you know, I've had a student say to me, if I take this class, I'm going to get a D. And, you know, that's not a way we want them to approach anything. So if it makes sense for them to take the on-level class because we know they'll be the most successful and they'll walk away with a stronger grade, then that's going to be the right choice for that student. But some students maybe want to push themselves a little bit more, and sometimes that does mean they might get a slightly lower grade than they would have in the on-level course. One thing to know is that when a student applies to any college, I think this was talked about a little bit, we write letters of recommendation on their behalf, and we provide the context for their course choices. So if a student knows that they may not get the highest grade in Advanced Physics 2, but that's really what they want to take, then they may take that class, and we'll talk about the decision around making that choice. We just don't want them to ever feel like they aren't ready for something that they're interested in if they're really excited about it.
The next question is there a tool you'd recommend that we can use to prompt a conversation about their interests and how to take them up now in ninth grade?
Yeah, I'd say probably the most obvious tool, Mr. Almonte talked about Big Future, and it's a tool that is part of the collegeboard.org website. So if you just type in Big Future College Board, you're going to find it by Googling it. And it actually does a pretty good job of outlining descriptions of majors so students can really read about them. They can do a read through of careers, and then they have a portion of it that's called the Career Finder, which attaches to a product called oh my gosh, I forgot the name of it. It attaches to I think it's, what is it? Oh, I just forgot. But it gives profiles of people that are in particular careers. So under the Big Future, you'll see Career Finder. It's called Road Trip Nation. I knew it would come back to me. Just a little bit of coffee hit my brain. Road Trip Nation, and it's part of that process. And it has videos, it has profiles of people that are in particular careers. When students get into their junior year, we sign them up for a tool called SCORE. And SCORE is the tool that we use to provide the questionnaires that we talked a little bit about. It's how we capture college lists where students are applying. We actually use it to send materials off to colleges as well, but it also has a piece of it called Use Science. So when students are getting into their junior year and are really starting to think about these things, I think the survey goes on for about an hour or an hour and a half. So not every junior, we don't force them to do it, but those that are really interested in doing it at that stage of the game, there's another step along the way for them to pursue a little bit of this research on careers and majors.
And then the last question we have in the box is, I'm hearing other parents say they are encouraging their 10th grader to take SAT prep over the summer since their other summer plans fell through. Do you think that makes sense?
I'd say it can for some students. One of the reasons why students most often will do their test prep during the junior year, junior fall, and take the exam in the spring, or they might start it even during the summer, but don't end up taking the actual exam until spring at the first time, is because they're developing, their brains are still developing. They're still putting a lot of coursework under their belts. You know, one of the best ways to prepare for that evidence-based reading and writing on the SAT or the section on the ACT, the English and the reading, is by reading and having more of those critical thinking skills develop along the way. So coursework that they even do in these first 2 years of high school are really preparing them. But sometimes they're mentally ready to take that exam early on. And I'd say you can see from that testing sheet that probably the earliest that we normally see students take those tests are for ACT, maybe February is one of the earliest dates, February of the junior year. For SAT, it's usually March of the junior year, but every year we have a few students who are ready to take that test a little bit earlier. Sometimes student athletes want to have their testing ready to be able to go into a recruiting process. So it is possible to do that. I would say if you're already gearing up for doing some of that preparation, and it's going to be something that not just takes up their time, but something that they're ready for and that they're going to make use of. There's ways of pacing it out over, say, the course of the summer, pacing it out over the fall. We offer classes on campus. So when we're back in session, we will be offering our bespoke classes. Typically, we do that in the fall, in the winter, and the spring. And our bespoke class this spring actually pivoted and went online for a while, testing times and dates were canceled. So they've actually kind of changed their schedule a little bit to prepare students more readily for those delayed exams. I'd say the biggest challenge that sophomores would find trying to take a fall test is, even though they're adding more testing dates and there's sort of this talk about turning tests to be an online test, we might find that that there are a lot of juniors that are really trying to take the test. So it might be difficult to find a testing site. It might be difficult to find the opportunity to actually take the test. But rest assured that there's plenty of time to be able to prepare for this, plenty of time to be ready to take these exams. And I think we'll see, like Mr. Almonte said, we're going to see further changes in the testing landscape over the course of the next couple of years.
So we have a question that says, what are Bespoke classes? Bespoke is an organization that does test prep for SAT and ACT that students can sign up for. And it's over, I want to say 11 weeks, 10 weeks?
So it really depends. So this year, I think we extended it a little bit. And I think it was over 12 weeks. And students get about 16 hours of test prep in a small group setting. So there are never any more than 8 students in those classes, which is really nice. It's not quite one-on-one tutoring, of course, but it does allow for students to have a more intimate interaction with their test prep teacher, so that they can feel they have enough time to answer. They get their questions answered. If there has to be some kind of differentiated learning in that space, that can exist. We just wanted to make sure that students had an option that was affordable beyond one-on-one tutoring, which can be costly. So the bespoke classes tend to be about $950 for over 16 hours of prep.
And we work really closely with families and with the test prep companies on making sure that if our families are receiving financial aid at Berkeley Carroll, that we're working with those test prep companies to make sure that the test prep is going to be affordable as well. So keep that in the back of your mind. I think at this point, Dr. Waller is in our audience, and she's indicated she wanted to say a few words. So I'm going to attempt to allow her to talk and turn on her video, unless, Mary, you're more familiar with the way that the webinar works. Is that something that you're?
I got it.
All right. I think she's unmuted. Okay.
Great. Thanks so much to everyone. I just wanted to say a quick hello and to thank our parents and guardians for joining this webinar, and to express my appreciation to my colleagues in the college office for this presentation, because it's been really thoughtful, really thorough, and I think very student-centered. And one thing I've always believed is that the college process is meant to be an educational process. It's not just a means to an end. And so I'm really happy to know that the collaboration that goes on between our students, our families, and my colleagues results in that end. So I just wanted to say a heartfelt thank you to you all.
Thank you.
And Dr. Waller, you have a junior going through this process.
I do. I'm here scribbling down things like Big Future and Road Trip Nation. So I'm getting ready.
Great. Well, thank you to you, Dr. Waller, for your support, and especially to the other administrators who are on this call as well. We appreciate your time. And thank you to all the families who joined us today. Thank you to my colleagues for sharing your expertise. And we look forward to working with you. We're going to follow up with the recording of this webinar today. And if we figure out that there are questions that haven't been answered or other resources that we need to send along with that follow-up, we will do so. So thank you so much and have a great rest of the day.